Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. It really is a pleasure to have everybody here in the room. My name is Joe Fitzgerald. I work with a nonprofit organization here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin called Milwaukee Water Commons. I'm going to be helping to just introduce the event today and welcome folks into the space. As a reminder, we will have opportunities for folks to ask questions later today. You should have access to a Q&A feature down at the bottom of the screen. So please, add questions into that space, and we will have opportunities for folks to respond to questions later during the event. We wanted to thank you all right away just for attending this roundtable conversation on preparing Milwaukee's water workforce to meet the challenge of lead service line replacement. This event is being hosted by the Coalition on Lead Emergency, by Milwaukee Water Commons, and by the BlueGreen Alliance. It's really exciting to be able to talk to you all today. Earlier this week here in Milwaukee, we heard from Vice President Kamala Harris, Senator Tammy Baldwin, Congresswoman Gwen Moore, and EPA Administrator Michael Regan, speaking about their commitment to removing lead pipes in Milwaukee and to ensuring that all families have access to clean, safe drinking water. We wanted to first just thank Representative Gwen Moore, Representative Ron Kind, Representative Mark Pocan, and Senator Tammy Baldwin for their leadership on passing the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act this past year. That federal spending bill is being called a once in a generation investment. It includes at least $50 billion in clean drinking water and wastewater infrastructure over the next 5 years nationally, $11.7 billion in drinking water state revolving loan program funding, and $15 billion specifically for lead service line replacement nationally. It's projected that $15 billion in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act would result in a total of 200,700 jobs nationally over 10 years. Earlier this week, we heard from the Vice President and from the EPA Administrator Regan that in 2022, Wisconsin should expect more than $140 million in funding for the water infrastructure, and more than $48 million for lead pipe removal. They're anticipating that funding would result in the creation of around 2,200 jobs in Wisconsin this year, many of which they said would come to Milwaukee. With the anticipation of a huge federal investment in the repair and replacement of water infrastructure, it's critical that we have more local and regional conversations about how to ensure that funding will allow cities like Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to meet the urgency of water challenges impacting the health of families in our communities, and how we will ensure that level of investment will create access to business opportunities and career pathways into living wage employment for women and for people of color who are so underrepresented in the water sector locally and nationally. In the city of Milwaukee, we need to begin conversations about the size and capacity of our water workforce, and whether we have the ability to upscale from replacing less than 1,000 lead service lines annually to quickly replacing the city's 70,000 lead service lines. We also need to know how we plan to change the diversity of Milwaukee's water sector to ensure that this funding is spent intentionally to impact a legacy of racial disparities in income and employment in Milwaukee that have continued to place our city among the nation's worst rankings for racial inequality and segregation. Even with increased federal funding, that level of transformation in Milwaukee's water sector is going to require intention and action from decision makers at many levels. The panel that we have here today is meant to begin a conversation with labor representatives about what exactly will be needed to facilitate the development of a diverse and local workforce capable of urgently replacing 70,000 lead service lines. It's my pleasure today to be able to introduce this panel. It's very exciting to be able to have this conversation now and here in Milwaukee. As a keynote to help us center the conversation today, it's with gratitude that I get to introduce Maria Carmen Beltran. We want to center Maria today as a keynote to introduce this conversation because of her and her family's own experiences with lead poisoning here in Milwaukee. Maria works with the Coalition on Lead Emergencies program, Coal Parents Lead. Coal Parents Lead organizes in Milwaukee with the goal to engage and support parents and families that have been impacted by lead poisoning. There's no one more qualified to be our keynote today and to introduce this conversation about the urgency of replacing lead pipes in Milwaukee. Maria, take it away.
morning, everyone. My name is Maria Beltran. I'm a homeowner and a native of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm a mother of 7, and I have 6 grandchildren. 3 of my 6 grandchildren have been diagnosed as having an elevated blood lead level. What tipped us off about my grandchildren were the behavior issues. They were having cognitive delays, overactive behavior, and academic concerns at school are what encouraged us to have the doctor check their lead level. We were fortunate to not have any of my grandchildren hospitalized, and also very grateful for federal programs like Medicaid to cover the cost of treatment and doctor visits. Currently, we reside in a home that's older and it was built in 1903, sorry. That was the original, that has the original plumbing, which is lead, windows and lead service line that came with the house. Living in the older home, I learned that it could be multiple sources of lead contamination in my home because of the chipping paint, galvanized internal plumbing, the soil surrounding my home, or my lead service line. This is an issue that is impacting families and communities, and disproportionately communities of color here in Milwaukee and across the nation. We are thankful for the funding made available by the bipartisan infrastructure law to address this issue and get lead service lines out of our communities. Thank you. And for grandparents like me and other families involved in the Coalition of Lead Emergency, this funding is a welcome relief after years of advocacy. But we also know it's not enough. We need more funding to replace 70,000 lead pipes here in Milwaukee and across the nation. In order to help protect children like my grandkids, it is so important that Congress continue to invest in our water infrastructure and pass the Build Back Better Act to provide the continued support to replace lead service lines. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that, Maria. Good morning, everybody. I am your co-host, Richard Diaz. I am the Midwest Regional Field Organizer with the BlueGreen Alliance and also the chair of the Coalition on Lead Emergency. I'd like to take some time to introduce you to our panelists and read about some of their work. First, we have Pam Fint, the president of the Milwaukee Area Labor Council, AFL-CIO. Pam Fint is a research director for the Laborers Union in Wisconsin. She conducts research to advance organizing and union density in the construction industry. Pam started with the Laborers in 2010, working on a pilot project for creating good, green jobs. Pam has received a number of awards for her work in the community, including the UW Milwaukee Scott Greer Award for Postgraduate Contributions to Urban Affairs, the UW Regents Academic Staff Award for Excellence, the MATC Apprenticeship Program Distinguished Service Award, and the Milwaukee Building Trades Construction Council Organizer of the Year Award. In 2017, Pam was elected as president of the Milwaukee Area Labor Council. The council has nearly 100 local union affiliates representing more than 25,000 workers. In 2021, she was elected for a 3rd time. Welcome, Pam. Next, we have Lindsay Bloomer, president and CEO of WRTP Big Step. Lindsay Bloomer is a respected nonprofit organization professional with almost 20 years of experience in executive leadership, strategic planning, entrepreneurship, social enterprise, and innovation. Bloomer has worked with a community fellow with the United Way of America, designing community impact solutions, advising and developing state government advocacy and policy work in various appointed roles. advancing circular and program design as Assistant Dean of Ripon College, creating collaborative community-based solutions as the Executive Director of a domestic violence and sexual assault prevention organization, and developing entrepreneurial pathways at Marquette University. Her dedication to mission-based and community-focused work continues to drive her personally and professionally as the CEO and president of WRTP Big Step based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Next, we have Patrick Pauly, Water Administration Manager with Milwaukee Water Works. Patrick has 30 years of engineering experience with the Milwaukee Water Works. He was the Water Mains Design Unit Manager from 2013 to 2016 when the need for a lead service line replacement was recognized. He was the Chief Design Engineer from 2016 to 2019 when the lead service line replacement program was developed. Mr. Pauly is currently the Water Administration Manager for the utility and remains involved in the replacement program. Welcome, Patrick. Next, we have Tom Zolik, President of Mid-City Corporation and board member for the Wisconsin Underground Contractors Association. Tom started his plumbing apprenticeship with Local 75 back in September of 1997. He graduated from the Milwaukee School of Engineering in May of 2001 with a bachelor's in architectural engineering. Tom has been a state of Wisconsin master plumber since 2002 and a state of Wisconsin professional engineer since 2006. Tom has been an owner of Mid-City Corporation since 2004 and currently works as the president, overseeing their utilities and water resources divisions and supervising approximately 80 employees between Milwaukee and Denver. Next, we have Mr. Steve Brightlow, business manager with Plumbers Union, Local 75. Steve started his career as a Steve started his plumbing career as a Wisconsin licensed plumbing apprentice. After serving and completing a Wisconsin plumbing apprenticeship, Steve passed his journeyman plumbing license exam in 1987 and his master plumber exam in 1991. Steve worked as a field plumber for the Winninger Company, Horner Plumbing, and Grau Company. Steve was appointed as Plumbers Union Local 75 Marketing Director in 1998, was elected business agent in 2004, and has served as a business manager of Plumbers Union since 2007. Steve also served as the secretary treasurer of the Wisconsin Pipe Trades Association and District 4 Vice President of the United Association. Welcome, panelists. I'd like to start by kicking our panel off with some questions earmarked towards helping the public understand what actually goes into replacing the lead service line. Let's take a moment to hear from you all about what that actually entails. Tom, let's start with you. From receiving a contract to getting started on the job, can you walk us through what goes into replacing a lead service line?
Certainly, Richard. The way that situation goes with we'll use a City of Milwaukee contract for an example. After receiving contract award and bonds and insurance are in place, we work with municipality to come up with the consents, the ability to go into people's homes. That's a huge task that's sometimes overlooked. You're working on private property, you have to be able to get in and work in people's homes and the public right away. We get those consents work and help the municipality gain some of those consents if they don't have them yet for the work area. And then we have to organize that data and be able to reach out to those homeowners and occupants of how and when we need to get into their property. When that is scheduled and set, Diggers Hotline and other utilities are made aware of the situation that's going to be going on, the excavation that's going to take place. Hotline is done. Now we're scheduled for construction. Proper inspection is lined up for the day of construction. A normal lead service takes 1 day to replace to a home. Depending on how we're doing, and if we're doing an entire neighborhood, one crew might do multiple services in a day. The way the work goes for that day is there's excavation taking place outside. There's potentially excavation or coring in the basement. There is trenchless technology used to bring the new service line into the house out to the main. At the end of the day, we've switched you off of that lead service line onto a new approved water line. New connections are done inside. An electrician has come in and redone the grounding so that the grounding is up to code. Plumbing, electrical, and water departments have inspected all of our work. Restoration is done with inside the home. Backfilling is done outside. Hardscape and landscaping is scheduled to be done in a timely fashion outside. Also during that day is we make sure that we flush out the entire plumbing system of the home to make certain that if there's any remnants of lead that came loose of the internal piping, that gets flushed out as well. Then we're into warranty and contract closeout, where we work with the contract administrator to make sure that the warranties are held up and contracts are closed out appropriately. Any callbacks are handled.
Great, thanks, Tom. Pat, would you like to weigh in on what goes into replacing the lead service line?
Yes, absolutely. Good morning, everyone. I certainly can improve upon Tom's answer. He properly described everything that goes into the lead service replacement. I think one of the things we struggle with a little bit is the perception that because a lead service can be replaced in a day, that it's simple and easy. And I think as Tom laid out, there's a number of components to the process, starting with an excavation in the roadway, an excavation near the property line behind the roadway, and then a drilling activity from the basement to the property line. And then in addition to that, there's residential plumbing required internally. And then there's a little bit of electrical work typically associated with the lead service line replacement, where the electrical grounding of a home is typically grounded to the service line, and that needs to be changed to the new service line. So there's a lot of components to the project. There's a lot of specialized training required for that workforce. And then I think Tom alluded to the fact that there is a city workforce component to each one of these, as far as the project planning, the project scheduling, inspection of the actual service line installation, and then plumbing and electrical inspection following the project. So there are quite a few components to the project, even though it all happens in one day.
Thanks for that response, Pat. And lead service line replacement doesn't seem like an easy task. Can you speak to some of the challenges that limit the timeline for replacement of lead service lines, Pat?
Certainly. So there's three primary ones, and the two most commonly discussed are funding and contractor capacity. But I think the third one that we're having frequent, regular conversations about the intentions to increase the lead service line replacement program. We're certainly recognize that needs to be done. We anticipate it being done moving forward. Our internal workforce challenge goes to some of the things I just mentioned related to, with planned replacements of lead service lines, there's an engineering component in the planning stages. There's certainly a heavy customer outreach component, as far as Tom alluded to, reaching out to the customer, explaining the program to them, gaining their consent to enter their residence, the scheduling component, the inspecting component. We have devoted a significant number of internal city workforce to the lead service program right now, and that will certainly need to be increased if the program overall is increased. And we also have some of our internal workforce that does replace the public side lead service lines. I believe our internal construction crews have replaced near 200 of public side this year, and on average do between 100 and 200. So that's certainly a challenge for us. The contractor capacity is also a challenge, but I think if there was a sustained, steady increase in the number of replacements, that the anticipation is that the private contracting community would fill that need and would grow their capacity as long as there's a certainty of work in the long term. So I think that's certainly something that deserves further discussion. And then certainly the financial component, and I think there's a number of aspects to the financial component. Is one, current process is that the utility funds the public side replacement, which means the utility water ratepayers are paying for the public side replacement. We don't know if that's going to change in the future, but certainly if the program increases, that increases the cost for that public side to the water ratepayers. The other thing that we hear traditionally is that the cost share that's a part of our program is a hindrance to property owners. And right now that cost share is about $1,843 currently. The total cost of a lead service line replacement run is approximately $10,000. So $5,000 for the public side, $5,000 for the private side, of which $1,843 is paid by the property owner. It can be added as an assessment to their tax bill and paid out over 10 years. But it's certainly a hurdle, and it's something that needs to be evaluated and discussed moving forward, depending on how this funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law is allocated. And so there is, I'll limit my time to those 3 minutes. I mean, some of these questions, certainly there's a lot more to be discussed, and I think we'll get into that later related to the infrastructure law funding. So, but I'll leave time for others.
Thanks for that, Pat. And yeah, we most definitely will get into that question right after I give Tom the opportunity to respond to some of the challenges that limit the timeline for replacement of lead service lines from a contractor's perspective. Tom?
As Pat alluded to, I don't foresee that there's not enough contractors, there's not enough inventory of work. When we have the inventory of work, sustainable work, we can build up for it. The timeline to get it done is completely limited, I think, right now by the funding. And as Pat said, once the funding is there, then we can get out in front, do the engineering, do the consents, do the community outreach. You can't underestimate the amount of community outreach that's needed for this. This group is extremely aware of lead service lines and the need to replace them, but there's a large amount of the community you realize that does not understand that. And you have to first educate on that, and then you can get consent to come into their property. A lot of people do not want the city coming into their house and doing work for them. So that is the real challenge, is getting the inventory of work up. The rest will follow, but it all starts with the funding.
Great. Thank you, Tom. That community outreach is so critical for the public understanding why we need these lead service lines replaced. So backtracking to Pat and your point about the influx of federal funding, how do you anticipate these dollars can speed up and influence our work? You know, how will Milwaukee Water Works manage this? What do you need in terms of support to help you manage this? Pat?
Well, so we're anxiously awaiting the guidance, and the first step in the guidance is that the EPA is going to issue guidance to the state DNR about how to allocate the funding, and then the DNR is going to respond with their plan to allocate the funding. And we talked to, I think Joe mentioned that there's been $48 million specified for the state of Wisconsin in 2022, and then there will be 4 more years of disbursements, for lack of a better term. We don't know what those dollar amounts are going to be, but that 48 million is for the entire state. 49% of it is going to be for forgivable loans, which we have been utilizing the DNR's Safe Drinking Water Loan Program, forgivable loan program for lead service replacement in previous years. So we're well versed in how to utilize that program. We just don't know yet what the system will be to disperse that funding and how much Milwaukee will be eligible for, how much of that will be the forgivable loans, how much of that'll be the low interest loans, what type of process there'll be. The anticipation is by fall, there will be a much better understanding of how we can move forward, how much funding will be available for us, and how to move forward to access that funding. So as I mentioned, we're fully on board with increasing our program. There's a lot of details, a lot of answers yet to be answered about how we do that moving forward. And as far as help, I talked a little bit about internal workforce. We, as a lot of employers, are struggling to recruit and retain employees, and we've been utilizing continuous recruitments for some of our water repair worker positions, our meter tech positions. We have jobs. There are going to be more jobs, more positions needed internally to continue to build this program. So, I mean, there is a need here. I mean, we can use help. Absolutely, we can use help.
Great, thanks for that, Pat. Steve, in terms of the federal funding for lead service line replacements, how do you anticipate that funding influencing your work?
I mean, certainly, create more hours for our members and open up the potential to put on some more apprentices and train some more folks. So I see it as a positive example, and we're hoping that, I think the more geographic they can start doing this work and do it in bigger blocks, the more efficiency and the more opportunity we have to tie that to a training piece, not only for the lead services, but put them in apprenticeships so that they'll have a well-rounded education when we do complete this task.
Great response, Steve. So let's switch gears a little bit and dive into the workforce development conversation. We like to take a moment to hear from you all about career pathways that lead into lead service line replacement. Could you guys talk about the positions doing that work and how folks can arrive in those professions? Let's start with Pam.
Thank you so much, Richard. I'm really happy to be here today participating. Because I think we've been pointing out, just like what the Vice President said when she was in Milwaukee on Monday, working on lead service line replacement in Milwaukee has both an important positive public health impact as well as the potential to create wonderful local employment effects. And the trades that do the lead service line replacement are represented on this call. I come out of the laborers union, Steve's with the plumbers, and operating engineers for doing the excavations. And as was mentioned, electricians play a bit of a role in that process as well. But it's a lot of work for laborers and plumbers, and the training pathway to become a journey level worker in those crafts is registered apprenticeship. It's been a successful model in the United States, as well as famously in Germany for more than 100 years. And there's even some really good recent reports that show if the intention is to connect people of color from non-traditional populations that maybe don't have someone in their family who had a career in the trades and they don't have as much knowledge about those opportunities, that registered apprenticeship is the path that puts people on a long-term career track with good wages, benefits, and retirement security.
Powerful answer, Pam. Thank you. Lindsay, would you like to touch on that point?
Sure. And I think when we think, thank you so much, Richard, and as others have spoken, it was a wonderful event on Monday. We were happy to host the Vice President at WRTP Big Step on Monday and really highlight this issue. And Pam hit the nail on the head here that, apprenticeship to registered apprenticeship is one of the best ways to recreate the middle class here in Milwaukee, pathways to family sustaining wages. And when we talk about specific projects like lead service line replacement, the pre-apprenticeship programs that we host at WRTP Big Step is one of the best ways to get people of color and women into the trades, to the laborers, to the plumbers, to the electricians, so that they have that holistic education component. So our pre-apprenticeship trainings will not only prepare you for apprenticeship and then even further apprenticeship on projects like lead service line replacement, but even further after those projects have been completed, further into other projects going forward, so that it's a sustained career path.
Thank you for that, Lindsay. And I have a question for you to follow up from that response. So for years in Milwaukee, there's been a significant gap in employment and in wages between white and African-American residents. In 2019, Milwaukee's unemployment rate for African-American residents was more than twice that of white residents. Between 2014 to 2018, the median earnings for African-American men and women in Milwaukee were around 60% lower than their white counterparts, one of the largest gaps in earnings in the country. From a 2019 needs assessment written by the UWM Center for Economic Development, we know that in the greater Milwaukee area, the diversity of plumbers, pipe layers, and pipe fitters is nearly 100% white men. What challenges are preventing Black and brown people and women from accessing water sector jobs and jobs connected to lead service line replacement in Milwaukee? What are your plans to create more access to water sector jobs for Black and brown people and women as the demand for a larger workforce increases? Let's start with you, Lindsay.
Sure, thanks, Richard. And that's a big question, you know, the question of why and how, right? That's a systemic issue that all of us face, especially here in Milwaukee. And in terms of, you know, how we think about solutioning around that, there are people, the people on this call, right? We care deeply about this. We wouldn't be here if we didn't care deeply about not just public health, but about diversity and equity in the trades as well. So one of the ways we're working to change those very statistics you just listed is WRTP Big Step is using our unique model of working with the trades to diversify the sector. So the pipeline is full of diverse candidates. I'm proud to say that at WRTP Big Step, with the trades help, with their industry fund contributions, and the model we use, I can tell you that through our doors recently, we have over 15% women who are in our training programs compared to the national average, which is about 1.2% in the trades. So we're seeing women come into the trades, particularly in the electricians, the laborers, and the plumbers. 55% of our current trainees identify as a person of color. So we're starting to see more people enter that. And then about 28% of our placements of those who identify as African-American are with WRTP Big Step in the trades. And right now it's only about 6% of the workforce in the trades. So tides are turning. And they're turning with intentionality because we're being intentional and mindful about our pre-apprenticeship programs and the supportive services that we offer around that. I think Pam had mentioned, if you don't have somebody who has been someone in your family that has been in the trades or who has done lead service line replacement, something like that, you don't know what you don't know. And that's what WRTP Big Step is here for and working with the trades for, so that we're able to highlight what is a trade, how do you get into it, and that there are these really great entryways to and through apprenticeship with WRTP Big Step. So the final question you asked is kind of how do you build on that? You know, we work with trades to offer the pre-apprenticeship programs that feed to the union apprenticeship programs. And when we put apprentices on these jobs like lead service line replacement, it helps create three things. It first creates the visibility, so people see that in the community. They see the trades as viable career path opportunities and the good public health work they do for us in our communities on our aging infrastructure. It helps to diversify the talent pipeline so that we're able, as more apprentices are hired onto these jobs, we're able to train more pre-apprentices that go into apprenticeship. So it stretches out that talent pipeline pathway. And third, it really creates this legacy of women and people of color in the trades through family sustaining wages, because we're able to see that pathway clearly. And these projects really highlight how apprenticeship is a really viable pathway for everybody in our community.
Great, thank you for that response, Lindsay. And Pam, I see your hand raised. Before you jump in, I want to give Steve the opportunity to respond to that question. Steve?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just awareness of the work in the trades. I mean, for about 20 years, at least 20 years, we've been on a path where college is highly promoted. The trades have been not promoted as highly. A lot of the high schools have lowered their industrial arts and exposure to shop classes. There's been less exposure to working with their hands in the high schools and a lot of push towards college. So we need to do a better job of getting that message out. These are good paying jobs. I mean, you got to work hard. It's not cut out for everybody. You know, it's odd to me, even some of our own members, they'll push their own children to college and don't promote the trades enough themselves, even though they've been very successful in it. But it's a hard job. You got to be able to travel. You got to be, working all different kinds of weather. I mean, it's not cut out for everybody, but I think we got to do a better job of explaining what it takes to get in there, get into the trade, get into an apprenticeship, and know that it's an honorable profession and that you can make a great living and retire with dignity and have great benefits along the way. And the other thing is in union crafts, that there is no wage disparity. It's wherever your skill level is. If you're a first year apprentice, they're all paid the same. Their benefits are the same. And so there's no wage disparity between race or gender. So that's a good benefit for the unions, or a good advantage for us in our employers.
Great. All right, Pam, knock it out the park.
Well, my colleagues stated a lot of the things that I'd like to highlight. One thing I've seen, which will make sure that the stats that you referenced, Richard, will be changed. Some of those stats are a little dated. The report's from 2019, but some of those stats go back a decade or so. And I bet the next time we take a look at them, we're going to see some good increases, because the Department of Workforce Development has increased their number of pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship readiness programs. The Social Development Commission, in addition to WRTP Big Step, Ezekiel Community Development, Brown Deer High School is now a pre-apprenticeship readiness partner. So, and that's not even the complete list for the Milwaukee area. I know in just the last year alone, the plumbers and the laborers together had more than 100 apprentices working in this area. And that's just 2 of 18 trades. So I feel a lot of reason to be hopeful. Part of it is the planning that we're putting into it. The city-county task force on climate change and economic equity has been looking at these issues of clean energy and clean water for more than a year. I would say before the Biden administration took office, these were just plans on paper with no idea of how any of it would be accomplished. And now we see with these federal investments that we can actually take these plans and move them from just a report on the shelf into actual implementation. So you mentioned it's a largely white male dominated field, without a doubt. March 5th, in conjunction with Women in Construction Week, there will be a woman-focused event, outreach event at WRTP Big Step, along with the organization called Empower, that's seeking to recruit and retain more women in the construction trades. And it's one thing we overlook in Milwaukee is the residence preference program that Patrick and Tom mentioned is considered a best practice nationally. When you think about the planning that went into the arena, that's what led to the success of nearly 1,000 residence preference workers from every zip code in the city being successful in launching their careers on that project. And so there's no reason why these big infrastructure projects cannot have the same stimulating effect and put people on the pathway to long-term careers.
Strong response, Pam. Thank you. Next question is, the City of Milwaukee is currently working with Milwaukee's contracting community to develop a disparity study looking at experiences with contracting and procurement through the city. Are there any challenges related to contracting and procurement that you think limit the action on lead service line replacement? Are there any changes that you anticipate would need to be made to city policies to drastically increase the number of lead service lines replaced each year? Let's start with you, Tom.
Richard, as Pam pointed out, there are certain requirements to work in the city of Milwaukee contractually. The residence preference program is a very large one. As much as some people look at it as a hindrance, we have no problem making that happen. And that's in conjunction with people like Pam and Steve and Lindsay being able to help provide qualified people to work on those crews. Again, I'm going to go back to what is hindering the work from happening is the funding. We need the funding to be able to start this process. As Lindsay mentioned, 2019, there was this new sector of work. Before that, the only time a lead service was replaced is when it was broken. There's 70,000 of them in Milwaukee. We have a lot of work to do, but we need the funding. When the funding comes, the hindrance will be gone and the work will be there and we'll be able to build that workforce.
Great. Steve, would you want to respond to that question based off of your work with different contractors?
I would agree with Tom 100%. I mean, it's, you know, you talk about even starting up in the business, it's hard to go into a business when you don't know how many are going to be done and how do you plan to tool up. I mean, the amount of tools and equipment that are required to do these one-day jobs is pretty extreme. And to have the skill and the talent of the workforce to be able to use those machines efficiently and get that project done in a day. It sounds simple, but it's a lot of coordination on the job. You're working in a neighborhood that's operating. There's parked cars. You're in the street. You're in the sidewalk. You're in the home. A lot of stuff going on, and to have all the tools and the skilled workforce to operate those tools efficiently and get the people's water turned back on, you know, that same day it's a daunting task. And but I think if you can do it geographically, where you do a neighborhood or a bunch of blocks in a row, you can gain some efficiencies, get more done per dollar. And it would be that I think is another thing, not only the money, but also some efficient spending of the money by doing it in more of a geographic grid instead of, you know, it was great. We started with childcare facilities and some of the others, but now we need to just go down streets and finish the job and get them done in larger blocks so we get a bigger bang for our buck.
Yeah, that aggregation of contracts is going to be huge for us, you know, meeting our goals and continuing to ramp up how many lead service lines we are replacing. So thank you for that, Steve. Anticipating that federal funding for water infrastructure could increase the rate of replacement for Milwaukee's 70,000 lead service lines. What would it take to build the capacity of small, minority, and women-owned businesses to create more access to contracting for lead service line replacement in Milwaukee? Let's start with you, Steve.
Well, again, I think that to open up a business, you have to have a backlog of work. And if there's not a steady, solid outlook of how much work is going to be done, pretty hard to open up a business when you don't know if you're going to have work next week or next month or 6 months down the road. So I think that's the biggest hindrance, is not knowing how solid the funding will be and how the work will be performed and how you can keep that crew working or your business operating once you go into that business. So again, if we can get the money, like Tom said, the funding is available and there's a plan to move on down through the city and get these done, I think folks will organically they'll be in business, the work will get done, contractors will go into that field to do it, and they'll be efficient at it. But again, I think it's just the outlook, a solid outlook of how much work is going to be done. That's as part of their business plans.
Tom, from a contractor who's been in the game for a long time, what would you say to someone who is looking to start a small business or a minority or women-owned business to create more access to contracting for lead service line replacement?
Create mentorships. There's very few of us that have the experience of doing this for many years. Again, this is a whole new industry doing massive amounts of lead service lines. Is there opportunity for small contractors to come in? Most definitely. Again, the most efficient way of doing this work is going to be large geographical contracts. But for example, in Milwaukee, we have the preference program and we have the MBE or SBE requirements. So there is so many other avenues in this work besides just digging the hole and pulling new pipe in. There's electrical work, there's restoration work, interior restoration, coordination, community outreach. There's all of those various elements that people can be involved in that they might not be thinking of and are probably less costly to get into and will give them sustained work after this. There's always going to be restoration work to be done on other public works jobs after the lead services are replaced. But lead services are only going to last so long. So if you just focus on doing just lead service work, maybe you're not giving yourself the longest sustained environment to be in.
That reminds me of a conversation I had with Steve some time ago, where Steve mentioned that, you know, they don't train folks to go just replace lead service lines. They train plumbers. So it's a strong response, Tom. Thank you. And speaking of my conversation with Steve, you've mentioned before that there's a waiting list of about 200 apprentices waiting to begin their careers as plumbers. What support is needed to build more union contractors to place these workers? Let's start with you, Steve, and then go to Pam.
You know, like the residential preference program is great, but I think they're also, you know, Tom is a approved training facility for apprentices in the plumbing industry and others for many, many years. And I think the contractors that invest in that workforce development by training apprentices, that should be a consideration made on who gets this work. If you're an approved training facility who does train apprentices and who's committed to workforce development, not only for one type of work, but for all types of work in your industry, those folks should have an advantage to be able to get in there and bid and do that work, because that's who's really replacing our workforce, not just for 4 or 5 years, but for generations, by having those contractors who do that workforce development through registered apprentice. Those are the folks that should be looked at getting into this work, and they'll be the most equipped to train and recruit folks to do that work and do it efficiently and productively.
Thanks, Steve. Pam, let's go to you. What support is needed to build more union contractors?
Well, I think, you know, we have a book. I'm using my book. Oh, here, I've got an extra copy. These are, you know, all union contractors in this book, but not all of them go through the Department of Workforce Development to achieve that trades trainer status that Steve is mentioning. So not every contractor takes on an apprentice. They might do all of their projects solely with journey level workers. And that's a model that works until people like me and Steve of the baby boom generation start thinking about retirement, and then they're gonna you know, be missing some of their key men and women on their crew. So I think the smart contractor is trying to think ahead and train up, but also when you're trying to run a business like Tom is, workforce is a piece of it, but workforce development is not necessarily top of mind. It's, you know, putting in a good competitive bid, because he's not going to put anybody to work apprentice level or journey level if he doesn't win in a competitive bidding process with the city of Milwaukee or the city of Racine or wherever he's bidding. So it's a balancing act, right? We need to share the news like we're doing today about how much work is going to be coming online. Traditionally in Milwaukee, about 5 contractors have regularly bid on the contracts for lead service line replacement. I wouldn't be surprised with the new money coming online that we don't see some more contractors deciding to throw their hat in the ring. And so that's going to give us the opportunity to even have more different workers working on these projects. But I've got to really echo what Steve said. If we have a contractor requirement that everybody who bids this work has to be willing to take on an apprentice per trade. You know, there's some apprenticeship requirements right now in Department of Public Works contracting. I honestly think they could be strengthened, and then we'd see the uptake of more young people into the trades and get started on a long-term career, because Tom's exactly right. We don't want to just train plumbers and laborers to do only one thing. You know, these skills are transferable from installing new pipe, and you know, you can go from sewer and water work to other types of plumbing or laboring. And so it's really putting your foot on the first rung of the ladder for a lifelong career, not just as long as this federal investment lasts. That's the goal that we should all share as a community.
Thanks, Pam. Lindsay, would you like to respond to that question?
I think Pam really wrapped it up so well. And just, you know, in terms of that, you know, workforce development, which is the other piece, right? The contractor and the apprenticeship and their trades, and then workforce development fulfills that triangle. You know, when we think about people entering the trades and our residents, so WRTP Big Step is a residence preference program certifying entity. So anyone can come in here. We get a lot of referrals, and even from our employers and contractors referring people here to get RPP certified. That even though workforce development may not be top of mind all of the time, it's a critical component to employing our residents, to diversifying our talent pipelines. And as everyone here has mentioned, the certified pre-apprenticeship programs we offer are multi-craft, right? So that somebody is there for a career pathway, and they may start in lead service lines, they may start somewhere, but they will go on to something else. And that's what's key to building our community for lifelong wealth attainment, lifelong family sustaining wages.
Thank you for that, Lindsay. And Tom, you have any thoughts about that question? What support would be needed to build more union contractors?
I'm going to echo myself again. We need the work to be able to build it. Mid-City has brought on many, many apprentices over our almost 60 years. There's a significant cost to a contractor to employ an apprentice. Everybody thinks, well, it's an apprentice, they're just getting paid less and you're getting the same work out of them. That's not the case. We're teaching a trade to them. We're also, for example, let's use Local 75. Our plumbing apprentices go to 5 semesters of day school that they get paid for. They go 1 day a week, 15 weeks. Times 5 semesters that Mid-City pays them 8 hours of pay for. Plus they go to 9 semesters of night school on their own. We have laborers apprentices right now that we pay a certain amount towards it. They get some of that back, but a lot of them are in school right now over the winter months when work is slower. There's a significant investment by the contractor. I love having apprentices at Mid-City. I love training them the way we want to do high quality work. But again, we need the work in front of us to be able to bring them aboard and sustain them. There's nothing worse than training somebody, getting them prepared, and then the next contracts aren't coming, or there's not the funding for it.
Strong response, Tom. All right, we are out of the questions that we have prepared. I'd like to give the panelists an opportunity for any closing remarks before we take questions from the media and then also questions from the public. Let's start with Patrick.
I do not have any closing remarks. I found the conversation fascinating. I appreciate the expertise that the other panelists brought to this, and it's always good for us as a utility and the city entity to hear these perspectives from the other participants and what we're trying to accomplish here. And I think we all see the need to increase the replacement program, and we're all willing to work towards that goal. So that's a very good thing. And I know there's some questions that I'll save time for that are in the chat already. So that's all I have.
Great. Lindsay, any closing remarks?
I think, again, I'm excited about the commitment of the people on the panel and in the audience to this work. And I think in terms of building equity and diversity into our work here in the city of Milwaukee, it's vitally important that we keep having these conversations and asking questions. And this is one of the great ways I hope this discussion continues in many different forms outside of here. But as I hear words like, mentorship and apprenticeship and, career pathways, something we're really looking forward to is how can we create, apprenticeship specialists and other things that really guide and coach and mentor people, and how can we work through this, because that's the only way we're going to diversify, but then also retain our strong union apprenticeship model here in the city of Milwaukee and in Wisconsin.
Wonderful. Tom?
No, just a great conversation. See everybody on board and looking forward to this influx of potential funding that allows us to be able to bring on more workforce.
And Steve?
Yeah, it's been long said that the licensed plumber protects the health of the nation, and the work at hand and the funding coming our ways is going to put us in a position to help do that. And I look forward to effectively and efficiently replacing these lead services with qualified workers and contractors, and appreciate everybody on the call and all the work being done on getting this initiative rolling.
Great, thanks for that, Steve. And last but not least, Pam.
This has been a great discussion, and I agree with everything everybody said today. It's nice to hear from so many different perspectives. When I look at what's remaining in the Q&A, I think really breaking down what the city role is, what the private contractor role is, who makes the decisions about the bids, and what are the parameters within the requests for bids seems to be some of the things that people want to know a little bit more about, but I have no doubt that organized labor can help rise to the challenge to help supply the workforce to get this important work done in a way that increases equity and diversity in our community. Thank you.
All right, that concludes our drafted questions for the panel. We'll begin by taking questions from the media. I see we have Susan Benz on the call. Let's start with her question, which is earmarked for Patrick. How many waterworks employees are currently within the lead service line replacement program?
So if I can summarize properly, let's start with, there are 8 positions 100% allocated to the administration of the program, located in our distribution section, who oversee all of the customer outreach, acquiring the permissions, scheduling the work with the contractor, with the property owner, inspecting the work as it occurs, and then processing all the paperwork for payment for the contract administration. We also, for planned projects, well, actually for emergency and planned projects, there are engineering personnel that are partially allocated to the lead service program, and that would include civil engineers and drafting technicians. And certainly if we expand the planned replacements, which is the intention here, is to expand the planned replacements and do this in a more orderly fashion, I guess I'd say, there will be an increase needed in the engineering aspect of these of these projects, because we do pre-planning, plan prep, so that when the contractor bids, we know we're going to get the best pricing available. There's also a accounting component. So we have accounting staff that are partially allocated to the lead service line replacement program, post replacement, related to payment, reporting to the PSC, who's our regulatory body. There's a Department of Neighborhood Services component. There's a plumbing inspection and an electrical inspection performed on each of these projects. So there's DNS personnel partially devoted to these projects. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have internal construction crews that perform public side replacements on an as needed basis. So there are potentially two construction crews internally to the waterworks, 4-person crews that routinely perform lead service line replacements. So it's a large number of staff partially allocated, and then 8 exclusively allocated.
Thanks, Patrick. Next question from Susan Benz is for Maria. Maria, what treatment did your grandchildren require as a result of lead exposure?
Being educated. They tried antibiotics to clear up whatever they thought was an infection in the brain. It actually worked, because with my grandson, he had it was almost like tics. He would just, like, with his behavior, he'd stand in front of the TV and just jump up and down, or just impulsively run and run. So we had to be educated on, like, therapy, as far as, like, to work on those things, and eat differently, and drink from different, with the filters. We were given a pitcher with the filters, not to no longer drink from our house faucet, just different things that we had to. But the only thing as far as, like, medication was the antibiotic to treat it, to bring it down. And thank God we didn't have to be hospitalized.
Thanks for that response, Maria. All right, next we will go to questions from attendees of the panel. Let's start with Jeremiah Toms. Where are these lead lines being replaced? Because I don't see any being replaced. Who decides which area and which neighborhood? Patrick?
So this is a good question, and I probably should have talked about this earlier. There's 3 components to our current replacement program. The first is childcares and schools with lead services. So registered and licensed childcares, and we monitor that list routinely, are subject to a full lead service line replacement at no cost to the childcare owner. The second component, which has been the largest component of the program, is the replacement of lead service lines that leak or fail. So if you have a lead service line and there is a leak discovered on it, there is our ordinance that went into effect in January 2017 does not allow for a repair or a partial replacement of that lead service. It is required that it be replaced fully from the water main in the street all the way through the meter the meter is typically located in the basement, through the meter in the basement. So the great majority of our current program has been these emergency replacements, which are basically one-off locations where the property owner, there's a leak discovered on the service line. It gets reported to us, they get added to the program. They're subject to the cost share that we discussed earlier. But there's certainly a visible need, an urgency to replacement when your service suffers a leak or a failure. So most people who are in that situation are very cooperative in getting that service line replaced because it's a tremendous realized benefit to them immediately. The third component, and the component that's going to have to be where the growth is seen moving forward, is the planned replacements. And we currently fully replace lead service lines at every planned water main replacement project that has lead service lines included within its limits. And so that's been part of our program since inception in 2017. And then what we've done most recently is added the component where if there's a roadway reconstruction project, we are replacing the lead service lines prior to that roadway reconstruction project moving forward. And I say roadway reconstruction because there's a lot of maintenance paving projects that get performed where we just do not have the ability to go out and replace the lead services prior. But so those are the planned projects. And then the intent moving forward is the planned projects, the scope of planned projects will need to increase in a planned, organized way to increase this program. So they are occurring. More than half of them to date have been the emergency replacements, though, so they may not be as visible because they're smaller one-off projects scattered throughout the city.
Thanks for that, Patrick. Next question is from Janet Pritchard. With regard to the average cost of lead service line replacements, estimated about $10,000, in recent years, about half of the lead service lines replaced in Milwaukee each year have been due to leak or failure or owner initiated, which means this will have been at scattered sites or without opportunity for pre-planning. Only around 1/3 or less of the lead service lines replaced have been adjacent to planned water main replacements and thus happen in one area in a coordinated way. If we move to a more systemic replacement of lead service lines, block by block, to what degree would you expect the average cost per lead service line to decrease? Patrick?
So this is also a really good question and something we discuss internally, and Tom probably can add on to my answer. I think the expectation is we'll see a reduction in potentially 30 to 40%. I mean, and I hate to use $10,000 because, obviously the market's changing with cost all the time. $10,000 is what we reported earlier this week at our semi-annual report to the Common Council was $10,000, which is an improvement of over $1,000 from this time last year. $10,000 for a one-off. I think our expectation is the planned replacements will fall somewhere between $6,000 and $7,000 each. And I don't know if Tom's in concurrence with that, or that's in the ballpark at least.
Tom?
Yeah, Pat, I'll add to that. You know, Mid-City has performed both of that work. I would say it's closer to a 20 to 25% that you see. And part of that is the way that the unit price bidding works with the pavement, kind of skews that and makes it look different. Remember, on a, as Pat calls, a one-off or a one-day emergency job, all of that pavement's built into their pavement restoration. When you do a water main relay, you have mass pavement restoration that would have happened most likely anyway with the water main relay. So there's a cost savings there, but a safe is probably 20 to 25% reduction.
Thanks for that, Tom. Next question comes from Julie Kersick. How do contractors compete for the business? Is Milwaukee Water Works the entity that decides who will do the work, or some other part of city government?
Well, Milwaukee Water Works is under the umbrella of the Department of Public Works. So we follow the city's formalized bidding process, and nearly all of the work is currently contracted for through an open advertise. We advertise the project, and we advertise packages of service line replacements for the emergency component. So we're currently advertising packages of 100 service line replacements. We've tried to increase the participation of contractors by either advertising smaller packages of replacements or larger packages. I think we've been as low as 25 and as high as 200, just to see what that does to our bidding pool. But we, the Waterworks, as part of Department of Public Works, are the contracting agency for all of the emergency, almost all of the emergency and planned replacements. And so the emergency get bid out in a package of 100, like I said, where there's no locations known. We then assign those locations. The contractor low bid is typically chosen. In certain instances, we have awarded multiple contracts through one bid opening if there's a necessity. But then once the contractor's on board, they are scheduled and assigned the locations as they become available. The planned projects will be different. As I mentioned earlier, we will be preparing a rudimentary construction plan that shows the locations of the residents, the water main, the service line. It gives, our expectation is that additional information and that pre-planning will be very beneficial to the contractor, certainly, and result in better pricing for us.
Great response, Patrick. Next question is from Jason Gills. Any ideas around planning and prioritizing the lead lateral removal in communities hardest hit by lead toxicity? Patrick, you want to respond to that one?
Well, it's certainly been a conversation, and we regularly meet with the health department, and I guess as discussed previously, it's not part of our current program, but there's no reason it won't be part of the conversation moving forward as we increase the planned projects and try to target blocks and blocks of service lines that can be replaced in a very quick and orderly fashion. So there are discussions about that. I guess that's where I have to leave it. There have been discussions about that. Certainly, as we increase the program, we do need to determine a defensible, orderly, step-by-step program for replacement. I mean, we need to have a plan in place that documents exactly how we have selected our locations for replacement, and that will be part of the program.
Thanks, Patrick. What recommendations do you have for Wisconsin DNR, who will be receiving these federal funds, in distributing federal funds and speeding up lead service line replacement? anything need to be done differently or better?
Well, we have had, I assume that's for me.
Yeah.
Too many of these are for me.
Yeah.
So we have regular conversations with the DNR, and certainly their guidance is given to them by the EPA, the federal government. So they have the ability to tailor a program, but only to a certain extent. And so we lobby hard to make sure that as much funding can be made as available as possible to us for our lead replacement program. We have to recognize there's 170,000 lead service lines throughout the state. And so this is a huge undertaking in the city of Milwaukee, but it's a statewide concern as well. We believe we're well positioned with our existing program in place and established that we will be able to ramp up the program and access and use this money. So, we're certainly making it well known to the DNR that we want to see as much money available to us as possible, because we think we're well positioned to move forward.
Great. I think these other two questions are for you as well. MMSD also has a program for replacement of old sewer laterals. Is there any possibility that projects to replace sewer and water laterals could be coordinated across Milwaukee Water Works and MMSD and undertaken by the same crews for cost savings and customer outreach, excavation, and restoration?
So we've had a couple of conversations with MMSD about this very thing. There's quite a bit of details to be worked out related to their contracting protocol is much different than ours is, but certainly there's conversation, and this was brought to our attention 6 years ago when we started the program, that the efficiency here is to replace the sewer lateral at the same time as the water service line. I know that a lot of the sewer laterals can be lined, and structurally, the structural integrity of them can be reestablished, and so it can be a different process. But we've had conversations, but quite honestly, with the status of our program as it currently exists, there isn't a lot of ability to coordinate with them based on the majority of our projects being the emergency replacements, child cares, and then the planned projects kind of filling in the remainder. Now, moving forward, we have had conversations, yes.
Great. And then last question is, another strategy the City County Climate Task Force has explored is to do full lead replacement, meaning a home in which lead paint and lead service lines are present, taking on the entire home at one time. Is that being explored as an option? And I think you kind of touched on that before, but if you want to just say a few more words, Patrick.
That conversation has been held as well with the health department, that in the interest of a clean slate, so to speak, in the interest of handling everything at once, there'd be efficiency gain there. That has been discussed, yes.
All right, I will kick it back over to you, Joe.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending the event today. I just want to, as we're closing things out here today, thank again Maria for joining us as a keynote for today's event, and thank all of the panelists for being here to share in this conversation. Definitely reflecting on just the appetite of this group to take on this work. The acknowledgement that we're kind of in this work together, and the excitement to be thinking about how we can get it done. And so really appreciate folks being on the call today. The event is being recorded, and so you can expect to see a recording posted later in the day today. Make sure that you share that around with folks, and that you reach out, to Richard and I, or organizations, or reach out to folks on the panel for more conversation. We want to make sure that we're replacing these pipes here in Milwaukee, that this funding is used in the best way that it can be, and that we're really creating access to living wage employment for folks who need it. And so thank you everybody for being here today. And with that, I think we'll close things out.